This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. Prepare for the Holocaust. Kill the Jews. Hashtag Hitler was right. Those are just some of the really attractive signs, placards and so on, chanting, that we're seeing in major European centers these days. Of course, the current battle over Gaza is not helping any of it. But anti-Semitism has been around since, I guess, pretty much the beginning of recorded time, and it just keeps showing up again and again. You'd think that people might have learned something from those events of the 40s. However, there it is again. Why? What to do about it? Why does it keep showing up? Pat Johnson is on the editorial board of the Jewish Independent, a newspaper here in Vancouver that used to be called the Jewish Western Bulletin, and he also writes for the Courier and for a number of other magazines and online sites and so on. And he is one of those curiosities in our culture who is a non-Jew who, for some reason or other, is excited by Jewish issues and ideas. Poor baby. Hi, Pat.
Hi, David. Good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you here. So, why this? Why now? What are we supposed to do with this? It's so ugly.
Yeah. One of the things that I think we need to be clear about is there was a headline that I saw, and I think it was in the Washington Post, but there have been thousands like it in the last few weeks.
Yes.
And that is something to the effect of Gaza conflict causes pro-Palestinian riots in Paris.
Yes.
And I think we need to be, first of all, really clear on cause and effect. The Gaza conflict did not cause pro-Palestinian riots in Paris. Anti-Semitism caused anti-Semitic riots in Paris. So it is important, first of all, to recognize that this is something that is inherent in Europe. We're seeing incidents in Australia. In response to some of the things that I've had published lately, I can tell you that Canada is not immune to it. And I think it is important for people not to be complacent and think that, well, when the conflict in the Middle East simmers down, the anti-Semitism will go away. It's a problem.
There are 500,000 Jews in France. There are 3 million Muslims in France. And the noise is about the Jews. And there are all these ancient myths that still obtain. The Jews have all the money. Oh, that I wish it were so. If this is true, would someone please check my bank account?
Well, and what we're seeing in France, there are multifaceted. You know, one of the things about anti-Semitism has been its malleability across continents and across centuries.
Yes.
And what we're seeing in Europe is a confluence of there are people who have come to Europe from places where Jew hatred is part of the curriculum in the public school system and in the popular culture. And then there is the familiar anti-Semitism of the far right. And in the last decade or two, there has been a somewhat new phenomenon of anti-Semitism on the far left. And these have all congealed to create what appears to be what is a very frightening situation.
Let's talk about the right and the left for a minute. On the right, we have Le Pen in France, and we have all these new aspiring political parties in England that are mostly anti-immigration. in the course of a few years, they've realized they can't be a one-note party because they won't get enough people elected. So they've had to broaden their interest to all kinds of issues. But some of them, to their credit, even though they've been sort of virulently anti-immigration, some of them, to their credit, do not want to line up with this kind of anti-Semitism. Even they find this offensive.
Yeah. Yeah, across Europe, and as we saw in the European elections recently, there is a birth of a whole new range of parties and opinions that don't fit neatly on the spectrum that we're familiar with.
Yes.
So to some extent, you could say, you know, the left has moved so far it's right, the right has moved so far it's left. It makes strange bedfellows, but often the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
But you pointed out in an op-ed piece you did in The Sun, and then you also did another beauty for the National Post, that I think people that we would say are left of center here in Canada, trade unions like CUPE, Ontario, the postal workers of all people, very liberal Christians, including the United Church, peace groups, university student unions, with whom I have had personal run-ins, which we may or may not get to, in their enthusiasm for pro-Palestinian issues, what they feel is an occupation and so on and so on. We're not going to get into arguing about the war, which thankfully is on a temporary ceasefire. You know,
it's always temporary.
May we God wish that it could become permanent. But here's people on the left, especially in North America, lining up, and the lines get blurred between, you know, many people watching this will say, well, don't I have the right to be an Israeli critic?
And of course, and you know, this is interesting because the historian Walter LaCour, about 10 years ago, analyzed all of the conflicts that had happened in the world since 1945.
Yes.
And this one fell down somewhere in the low 40s, 46, 48, somewhere around there.
You mean the current Gaza conflict?
Well, not the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay, yes.
And I would suspect, given events around the world in the last 10 years...
What do you mean it fell down in the 40s? You mean in terms of numbers of people killed and so on?
Yeah, in terms of the casualties of conflicts.
Yeah.
This is a relatively small conflict in the bigger scheme of things, including things that are happening in the world, including almost right next door.
Right now.
Right now.
Yeah. About which many people are doing next to nothing, and about which many people are saying next to nothing. But this one draws an awful lot of attention.
And so, as I've written, you know, I can understand fully that there are people who take a particular interest in this conflict. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all have a vested interest in this territory, this land.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I can understand that there would be hundreds or maybe thousands of people protesting outside an Israeli consulate. But when we see millions of people, when this comparatively minor conflict becomes the major international event, eclipsing multitudes of incidents that make this pale in comparison, that goes beyond reason to a certain extent.
You know, people, Pat, often use language so inappropriately and so freely without really thinking about what they're saying. So, for example, Stephen Harper, not my all-time favorite prime minister, but there he is. I don't know what he's done that's been so terrible. I think he's a dull guy who's been a reasonable manager of affairs. A lot of people would shriek to hear that. But there he is. He's been demonized. People call him a Nazi. No, Nazis are people who went about exterminating people. That's not what Stephen Harper does. Stephen Harper does things that a lot of people don't like. So do you think that some people just get on a bandwagon and start yelling, kill the Jews? Or, some people just misuse the language?
Well, certainly some people do, and that is actually an issue that I think we should address, because in fact, the term anti-Semitism to me is problematic, not only because it was created by an anti-Semite to define his own ideology, that's an aside,
yes.
but because it implies an active antipathy. It is anti-Semitic. Now, the people who are firebombing synagogues in Paris, they're clearly anti-Semitic. But that's different from what I suspect is a much larger number of people who bear unconscious biases about Jewish people. So when they hear the most extraordinary, extravagant allegations against Israel, there are a lot of people who appear willing to accept them without criticism, without looking at it critically, because perhaps that's what they expect from those people.
Two incidents. I'll make it very quick. I'm in Trieste, Italy, 5-6 years ago. I can't get in to see the oldest, biggest synagogue in Europe because they won't let anybody in. If I had phoned in advance from Canada and said that I'm a Jew and here's all the rabbis I know, I'm sure they would have greeted me and let me in the secret door, right? But just as a tourist, no, because of security. Secondly, I go to see this startlingly beautiful synagogue in Florence, which takes up a whole city block, and everywhere there are armed Italian police, carabinieri. And I stupidly say to these two guys carrying submachine guns, "Why are you guys posted here?" And they look at me like I'm a total idiot. And one of them just looks at the building. He says, "Signor, it's a synagogue."
Yeah.
So this is an ongoing concern.
Yeah.
You know, how shocking is it, those of us who are old enough, I was born in 42, to see shops in Paris having their windows broken today. We thought that ended in 45.
And I think that one of the reasons, and there have been people who have spoken up about it, but you mentioned the Canadian Union of Public Employees Ontario branch, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers United Church. There used to be plausible deniability about the level of anti-Jewish animosity within that movement. These organizations that are part of that movement need to speak up, and there are people in Europe who need to speak up. And I can't help feeling that one of the reasons that that people aren't speaking up more is this unconscious bias that maybe that's what they deserve.
There's another reason, that's called fear, which is human nature, right? Yeah.
You think people are afraid to speak up against?
Absolutely, yeah. We're going to take a little break. Pat Johnson is our guest from the Jewish Independent. He's on the editorial board of Jewish Independent, and writes for them from time to time. Take a little break, your chance to say hello to davidberner.com, and also the opportunity for those nice folks who support us here to say hello on Shaw Community Television Cable 4. Back with you in just a moment.
Excellent.
Yeah, dynamite.
This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper.
My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. Today in Greece, Golden Dawn is a neo-Nazi party whose senior members were charged last year with running a criminal organization. They won 9% of the vote and 3 members in the European Parliament. Golden Dawn uses a stylized Nazi flag and Nazi memorabilia and so on found in people's houses. anti-Semitism is alive and extremely unwell in Europe these days, and lots of places, but especially in Europe. Our guest is Pat Johnson, a writer for many papers, but in particular he's on the board of the Jewish Independent, which is funny because he's not Jewish. Funny you don't look Jewish. So let's talk about the media for a second. Here's something that I find extremely disturbing. What paper is this? This is the Sun. Here's a photo. It says, Israeli army officers talk at the entrance of a tunnel allegedly used by Palestinian militants for cross-border attacks. Allegedly. These tunnels are stocked with rockets. The plans have been to absolutely swarm into Israel and kill everybody available. That's what the tunnels were built for. They're not shopping malls.
And they're not bomb shelters.
And they're not bomb shelters. They're tunnels for an invasion. Why would the Vancouver Sun or anybody else say, standing at the entrance of a tunnel, allegedly? Well, this hasn't been proven?
Well, it's interesting that that degree of caution was used there, because in a lot of cases we have seen a great lack of caution in coverage of this. There have been incidents where, in the last few weeks, where things were reported as fact, and then quickly, of course, alternative facts arise.
Yes.
In the end, the truth presumably will come out. I'm sure that there will be endless United Nations-backed studies and panels into everything that's gone on. But in terms of the media coverage, I do take some exception to people who get too agitated about a particular incident in some Des Moines, Iowa newspaper or something, because we humans have more access to more information
than
sources.
Ever before.
Yeah. And so if you want the truth, I think you can find it as much as truth is possible to find during war.
You said in the end, are you optimistic that there is an end to the particular conflict that we're witnessing now? And if there is that going to ameliorate anti-Semitism?
Well, you're putting me on the spot, because I can't say that I'm optimistic. Somebody challenged me. I've been having a lot of, in the aftermath of these few articles and my usual inflammatory activity on Facebook and social media, I've been challenged, and rightly, on a few things. And one of them is, well, what would victory look like for Israel, right? And what would victory look like for Hamas? Well, Hamas is absolutely clear about what victory means for Hamas. It means
no Jews
in the Middle East.
Right.
And victory for Israel, unfortunately, history tells us that if Israel is successful in beating back Hamas in this conflict, they may have a few months or a few years of peace, and then Israel's enemies will rear up again, and it will happen again. I don't believe that there will be a permanent resolution to this conflict until, and it's not really about the Palestinian people, it's about the much broader Arab and Muslim world and their leaders come to conclude that Israel is a positive force in their region and
somebody I think smarter than both of us has said, and we're pretty sharp, somebody has said that this war will never be resolved because it's not about territory, it's not about gold, it's not about money, it's about ideology, and it's ancient, and it just is not going to change. Let's leave. I don't, we agreed we didn't want to get into the whole thing about the war. Let's go back to this anti-Semitism. You have said in your National Post article that people who are pro-Palestinian are often not helping themselves in the way they go about expressing their support. Why is that?
Well, as a journalist and as an activist and as somebody who has worked on campuses, all three major campuses in British Columbia, I have been to a lot of so-called, and I put these in quotes in my article, pro-Palestinian rallies, because I don't believe that...
You've sat in pro-Palestinian meetings.
Many.
Yes,
yeah.
I know, yeah.
I can tell you that on the other side, from 1947, when the reality of a Jewish state in the Middle East became a fact, a historic fact, and its creation in 1948, Zionists and Jewish Canadians and their supporters in Canada have raised funds and supported in every way they can great organizations in Israel like Hadassah Hospital and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and Ben Gurion University. One of the reasons that Israel is what it is, which is one of the world's leading places of academic and scientific research, is the support of world communities like Canadians. Pro-Palestinians are not making any efforts to build the kind of civil infrastructure in Palestine that would portend a successful state.
You have argued it in pieces you've written that people often who donate to pro-Palestinian causes do not look for and do not find their money going to universities, to freeing women, to equality, equal rights for voting, for work, and so on, to all of those democratizing gestures, but in fact, mostly just to more terror activities.
Well, I mean, in Canada now, there is a strong law to ensure that money raised in Canada does not go to terrorist-related organizations. But I still maintain that there isn't much money being raised there anyway. At the events that I have been to, the money raised has primarily been for publicity stunts.
Publicity stunts?
Well, yeah, like the flotilla to Gaza in 2010.
Yeah.
I mean, they were going around the UBC campus. There was a big issue on the UBC campus because some money was allocated from the Student Society funds to support the flotilla to Gaza. And what the outcome of that, well, to go into detail, to not go into detail about what happened when Israeli military entered the boat and were attacked by the people on the ship. The ship was not bringing much in the way of anything that would help Palestinians. And in fact, what amount of money?
What were they bringing?
Well, in one case, a bunch of balloons. And the money that, in fact, was being carried on the flotilla, and perhaps I'm mistaking, it may have been a different ship, but was presented by the rogue British Member of Parliament, George Galloway, and handed over directly to Hamas.
This situation is so bizarre in some of its minutiae. You've pointed out that a group called Queers Against Israeli Apartheid doesn't help lesbian, gay, transgender, etc. Palestinians. It doesn't help Arabs who want to live an open gay life. The group's sole raison d'etre, you say, seems to be to destroy Israel.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary that people are putting on masks and calling themselves, taking up the mantle of GLBTQ people,
yes,
and alleging that they are making a case that gay people would be supportive of, when in fact they are opposing, in the most visceral terms,
yes,
the only place in the Middle East where gay people are legally equal and protected under the law, and making common cause with parties that execute gay people en masse.
What, if anything, we just have a couple minutes left, Pat, what, if anything, can you do, can any of us do? You're writing, you're a writer, that's what you do, that's your trade. You come on a program like this, you keep writing articles. What can we do about this ongoing poison called anti-Semitism? Isn't it as irrational and ugly as calling black people the N-word? Isn't it as evil and awful as stigmatizing any racial group or religious group or ethnic group?
Yeah, the irrationality of anti-Semitism is one of its most successful traits. It is
the
utterly
big sales
irrational.
Point.
Yeah. And so, what can people do? First of all, obviously, speak up when we see it, which is not happening adequately enough. But I would go a step further, and I would say earlier I spoke about unconscious biases. And I guess I would ask people who, by no definition, could be called anti-Semitic, to check their prejudices, their unconscious biases, so that when they hear something about Israel or about Jewish people, they question it and behave a little more critically.
Fair enough. I think about the level of ignorance about dear friends of mine who have unthinkingly told stories to me in which they say, "So I Jewed him down," and I have to go, "Excuse me, what was that?"
And it was probably unconscious. It was embedded in...
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my friends, when I pointed this out to him, started crying. He was so ashamed of himself. He was so embarrassed. He didn't realize what an ugly thing that was to say. You know.
And we have to acknowledge that we all carry things with us.
Absolutely.
That,
Absolutely.
And we need to check our...
I'm very suspicious of non-Jews who are into Jewish issues.
Me too.
Pat, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, David, for inviting me.
Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands, organs, senses, dimensions, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases as a Christian is. We'll close tonight with a bit of a writer. His name was William Shakespeare. Next week, we said last week that she would be on this week, but Pat and Karen switched places. So Karen Medeiros, the Executive Director of Adoptive Families Association, will be with us to talk about the complexities of adopting and having foster children. Thanks for being with us tonight here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.